Hi guys, Lori here. I saw this video on Super Space Chicks channel and I wanted to do one my own. Her video was favorite bookish podcast, and I realized I listen to a lot of bookish podcasts and some of them kind of fly underneath the radar, so I wanted to give a couple of shout outs. I started listening to podcasts pretty religiously around like 2007 with Harry Potter. I started with Pottercast and Mugglecast, and since then I have been a devoted Pottercast listener. I mean, just podcast listeners in general. But the gateway podcast that I still listen to this day is Mugglecast. I cannot say enough good things about this podcast. I feel like Andrew, Eric, and Micah are people that I just listen to every day, and I love them. They are great podcasters, and especially in the lead up to Deathly Hallows, their first 100 episodes is the lead up between the end of the end of Half-Blood Prince and the lead up to Deathly Hallows, and it's some of the best theorizing I've ever seen and ever witnessed, and I love it so much. I listened to those episodes over and over and over again, and I must have listened to their spoiler reveal about what happens 1,000 times. I love that episode so much. But then they kept doing, they did all the movies, and they have really interesting coverage about that. And then after, the movies, they died down a little bit, and they had this big ending, and then not even a month later, Fantastic Beasts was announced. So now they are back because of their Patreons doing weekly episodes. I'm a Patreon, and they have a couple of different tiers, but they just have the best and most well-rounded coverage I've ever heard, I've ever listened to, and I rely on them so much for my Potter news. And I remember when they had stopped making everyday episodes, I had to go find other means to get my Harry Potter news, and you will hear about them in this podcast. But they are back and better than ever. I really hope that they do a book reread, because I would love to hear their thoughts now after all of these years. But they do have episodes. I think that they do every book except for Order of the Phoenix. I don't think they ever actually finished that Mugglecast. But they have all the other books. I know that they definitely have Deathly Hallows and book 1 and book 2, and I think they have the other ones too. But it's a really good podcast. They also have really, really fun stories since they've been in the fandom for 12 years, and they just have their down pat. So I would highly recommend Mugglecast. If you have not been listening to Mugglecast, I highly recommend you check out the newest episode. Their most recent one was how to get your friends who are not into Harry Potter into Harry Potter. So it's just, I highly recommend it as a podcast. The next podcast I'm going to talk about is Hype, and this is also a podcast from Hypeable.com. And yeah, that's where I'm going to. And they stopped doing their coverage, I needed to find a podcast when Mugglecast and Pottercast really stopped doing episodes. I really needed to find somewhere to listen to get all my Potter news. And I stumbled across Hypeable.com, which Andrew Sims started, and he had started a bunch of podcasts, and this was the first one that popped. It was a general entertainment news podcast, and I just started listening from day one, and I just fell in love with it. It's changed a lot. They have new hosts. Now it's probably one of my favorite podcasts. I love Pam and Selena so much, and I listen to them religiously. They do a really well-rounded podcast. They also have a book club for their Patreons, and they do a lot of book and adaptation news. They're actually the reason I won a bookish trivia contest between them and Book Hype, which I'll talk about next, because I just know all my knowledge from them, and they are just spectacular podcasters. I was actually on a recent episode on a listener call-in show because Selena was out traveling the wilderness. So that was kind of fun, but I feel like whenever I tweet at them, I feel like I'm tweeting at friends and listening to friends, and they really take fandom news and put a spin on it, and I think that I just really love their opinions, and they really open your eyes to stuff that you would never have considered before. So they don't just talk about books and adaptations, but they talk about everything, and I just really admire them, and I love them so much. They're about to start a Merlin rewatch, so if you're a Merlin fan and have always wanted to watch or rewatch the series, newbies and super fans are welcome. It's a really fun time. I did the Gilmore Girls rewatch with them as a super fan, and I loved it. So I highly recommend, if you have not checked out Hypeable.com, definitely check out Hypeable, but also check out this podcast. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. The next podcast I'm going to talk about is Book Hype. It is also housed at hypable.com, and it is a podcast focused only on books. So if you have not heard about this podcast, tuck in and I will tell you all about it. This podcasting trio is also an all-girl podcasting trio. Some of the older episodes have Kyle in them, but the trio is Karen, Brittany, and Kristen. And I listen to these girls on so many different podcasts, so they are probably some of my favorite podcasters, along with Pam and Selena. But they just have a really well show. I know that life gets busy sometimes between Comic Cons and stuff like that, so they don't upload every week, but they really try to, but they do. They also have a book club, which recently they did Roar by Cora Carmack, which I adored. They have author interviews. Their news section is so well put together, and I learned so much from that news section. Again, it's why I won my Bookish Podcast thing, my Bookish Podcast trivia contest, because they put their news segments together so fabulously, and I think I love what they're reading section, because I get so many books to add to my TBR. I am not really a new adult reader, but hearing the premises make me intrigued, and I picked up a lot of books from Kristen because she's mostly the new adult person. But I love them. I love hearing them talk. I love their opinions, and I look forward to their episodes so much. And if you have not listened, you will have a backlog of episodes to listen to. They have book clubs about The Darkest Minds, Shadow Queen. There's one about The Cuckoo's Calling by J.K. Rowling. They just have a lot of episodes, so I highly recommend it if you have not checked it out, and they are really spectacular podcasters, and I hope you guys will consider checking them out. The last bookish podcast I'm going to talk about is a new recent find for me. It's only been the last 2 years that I learned that Alohomora even existed, and that's the podcast I'm going to talk about. 2 years ago, I was really looking for a reason to reread the whole entire series. I have not done that since Deathly Hallows came out, and I was like, I really wanted a reason to read this. And Eric Skull, who is a host on this podcast, talked about it on MuggleCast and was like, oh, we have this, this reread podcast, this global reread, and one episodes. Most of the episodes are devoted to one chapter, but some earlier are devoted to 2 chapters. And it's a deep dive into the series. I'm just about to start Half-Blood Prince. And I just love it. I think that they really do their research, and they pull stuff from history, and they really use, it's just like a wide, diverse host. They have guest hosts, they have listener call-ins, they have, listener guest hosts, and they also, now that they have done the entire Harry Potter lexicon, they've done the series, they've done all the companion books, they've done Cursed Child. Now they're doing a deep dive into other topics in the series, and I can't wait to get to those episodes, but I'm just not there yet. But it's just so well done, and I'm so excited to finish my rewatch. Hopefully this year, it might be next year. But it's just a really, really well done podcast. So those are all my bookish podcasts that I listen to pretty regularly. I want to give us a couple of shout outs because they are just podcasts I also adore. I really love Rewatchable, which is also a podcast from hypable.com. This is where my Buffy insanity has come from, because I have fallen down a deep Buffy hole, and I blame the entire host of Rewatchable. If you guys are watching this, totally your fault. But that's another one that I listen to, and I also listen to Not Another Teen Wolf podcast and Not About the Weather, which is basically from the same bunch of people, but one is all about Teen Wolf and one is about a general entertainment podcast. They do talk about books sometimes as well, but it's a lot more life developments, and they have a hype and a gripe every episode. But yeah, those are all the podcasts that I listen to. If you guys have any podcasts in the comments, put them below, and I will add them to my to be listened to list. But I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll talk to you guys later.